Welcome to Bigger Possibilities, a podcast from Schultz & Williams, where we explore what's possible for nonprofit organizations and the world through leadership, purpose, and progress. I'm Craig Shelley, the CEO here at Schultz & Williams. Each episode, we sit down with leaders and change makers. We talk about their stories and what shaped them, what they've learned, where they see things going. Today, I'm very excited to spend some time with Stacy Palmer, the CEO of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. We've had the opportunity to interact quite a bit over the years, and she's been someone that always brings a great perspective to the work and the sector and to leadership broadly. So, Stacy, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for asking me. I'm glad you're doing this.
Let's start with your story. Working at a nonprofit journalism organization focused on philanthropy, that's a niche. I'm going to suspect it wasn't your dream at 10 years old, but how did you get into this work?
Yeah. Well, when I started, I started as a journalist, wanting to cover the world. I grew up in the Watergate era and was really influenced by Woodward and Bernstein, and that was what I wanted to do. So I came to Washington, D.C. to be a reporter and landed at the Chronicle of Higher Education, which covers colleges and universities. And that was a wonderful world to be able to explore Washington through a landscape that was very specific, but really affected tons and tons of people and institutions and understood how they worked. And so it was a fantastic job. And during the Tax Act that was debated in 1986, I started understanding exactly what happens in philanthropy and how taxes matter, which was a strange way to get into this field, but I started understanding it, and at the same time, we started hearing from nonprofits that they really needed a publication that served them. And so all of these ideas came together, and we decided at the Chronicle that it was time to not just have a Chronicle of Higher Education, but have a Chronicle of Philanthropy. And so, that's how we got started in the ideas to say nobody's covering this field. It's becoming way more professionalized. People need to be connected to each other. And journalists are doing a really crappy job of covering this field. Most people at that point thought that nonprofits were only involved in charity galas or fraud, and there was a fair amount of fraud at United Way's going on back then. That's what got the headlines. Those were the only things that got the headlines, and we knew there was so much more. So we wanted to solve that problem and decided to dive in. So that's how I landed here. Not setting out to be a nonprofit CEO myself. We were a for-profit organization. So it's only been 3 years since I've actually been in a nonprofit itself when we decided to convert.
Excellent. Well, I'll be curious to learn more about that, but it's just so funny, I wonder how many people Woodward and Bernstein set out on career paths inadvertently.
Absolutely.
I studied journalism specifically because of that. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be Woodward and Bernstein. I spent 6 months at a local newspaper in Queens covering community board meetings, and I was like, I feel like this is pretty far away from Woodward and Bernstein.
Yes. That would have been too much.
I could not see the path, and ended up in nonprofits, which has been amazing. But just funny that you mentioned that as kind of the origin. So a lot of questions kind of coming out of that. But when you first sort of when you think about how you sort of evolved as a leader and sort of started to be in leadership roles, spin out of the Chronicle of Higher Education, start up this thing, what did you get wrong early on? What are some things you look back and you're like, I would have done that a little bit differently?
Oh, pretty much everything. I think as we were all, you can think of a lot of the things that you might have done differently. One of the challenges of, we were 35 years old as an organization when we spun out, and so we spun out from the Chronicle of Higher Education and decided to become a nonprofit, which are two different things, and it was two different decisions about what we wanted to do. And so trying to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves at the same time that we needed to keep everything moving and going. And the news doesn't stop. So, our website had to operate 24/7, even though we were transforming the entire organization. All we had when we moved into the nonprofit was we had a strong editorial team. We had no business, we had no tech, we had no HR, we had none of those things. So we had to build all of that up. That process, if I had it to do all over again, I think we should have just incubated ourselves a lot longer and really built a leadership team before we came out publicly. We were asking everyone to do an awful lot. And so I think I would have slowed down a little bit, which is sometimes hard to do when you're just ready to move. And the IRS took so long to look at our application. This whole nonprofit news structure and moving from for-profit to nonprofit is really complicated for them. So we were just raring to go. But I think I would have held back a little bit and built the organization more quietly and more deliberately. And, one of the things that I have benefited from greatly over the past year is I've taken on some new leaders who have much more senior expertise, fractional CFOs, CHROs, those kinds of people who, they don't work for us full time, but they provide tremendous expertise. And instead, what I did was hire people who were more junior, thought that they could, come up to the job. And they provided wonderful energy and ideas, but they weren't ready to take on all of these challenges. So I'm thrilled that in the rest of the field, I see much more interest in this idea of fractional leadership. And I recommend it to anybody who, is looking for that kind of supervision of a team, bringing that expertise, and people who are just really excited about the mission, because many of these folks have worked at organizations before where they didn't feel quite so motivated.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's been a huge, you're right, it's a huge trend. I feel like I remember when people were like, well, you can't possibly outsource anything, and now there's few things that nonprofit leaders don't even consider. And again, this is a little bit like the cobbler telling you need new shoes because we provide services and we do them for fundraising, and our partners at Carrion Co do them for finance and all sorts of things. But hey, you can just get a different level of expertise. And I also think it's like people are locked into we need this thing. It's like, well, actually, you probably need less of the thing than you think. If you got the right people that have experience, you'll realize actually 3 days a week is all I need, and I didn't need someone at my beck and call all day.
Yeah.
That's good. So obviously, actually, let's stick with that for a second. What was the impetus? Why turn into a nonprofit? What was what drove that?
It was a really big question, and we had been mulling it around for a while. As I'm sure all of your listeners know, journalism has been going through quite the challenges in terms of readership, financing, thinking about how to best serve the world. And so we were grappling with those kinds of questions and trying to think about what structure made the most sense. Nonprofit newsrooms, it's really been in the past decade especially that they've grown stronger. They were very, very novel, quite, really until pretty recently. And so we were watching what they were doing to make sure that they were succeeding. For us, it was a special problem because we cover nonprofits and foundations. So the idea of becoming one,
you were just like, oh, that looks so fun, we should do it. No, that wasn't.
We were really worried about would our audience, how would they feel about our integrity if we were accepting foundation grants? I think most folks thought we were already a nonprofit because we didn't have a super for-profit mentality. We really cared about doing great journalism and doing good service. So I never was really worried about that. And most people, when we announced that we were making this move, they were really surprised because they said, well, we thought you were nonprofit all along. But the idea of us taking money from foundations, which is a small part of what we do, we have mostly earned revenue, but we wanted to try that out. So we did that right before COVID. We started very gently going into the fundraising world. We spent more than a year developing a code of ethics for how we would accept funding because, the journalists were very nervous about how it was going to affect their ability to cover the field. We were lucky. We chose terrific grant makers who never tried to intrude on anything we were doing, really just wanted to advance the work. And so we felt really good about it. And so that part was going well. What really tipped us over, though, to say there's a bigger world out here that we need to do things. First of all, COVID was, the audience needed us to do a whole lot more, and we didn't have the resources to do it. We threw everything at covering that tragedy, but then we couldn't cover anything else that was going on in the world. So we knew that that was a problem. We also were fortunate to, right before the nation shut down, we got a grant from the Lilly Endowment to work with the Associated Press and a group called The Conversation, which works with academics to provide fact-based information to them. And all of us united around the idea of how can we educate the public about this unknown world of philanthropy and nonprofits. And the idea had been, pre-COVID, that we were going to do all these forums all over the place. In addition to great journalism, the Conversation works with colleges and universities, and we were going to travel the country. We were going to work with local newsrooms and bring them together, regularly to rally behind this idea of covering nonprofits. And then we had to rethink that approach entirely. But we moved everything online to do those kinds of things. And it was so exciting to have that opportunity to think about how do we influence the public. We're really known as a trade publication, but what's really important is for us to help the public better understand why nonprofits are vital, what they do, how they do it. And we just didn't think we could do that in the for-profit structure very well. We needed to grow. We needed to be able to be more mission-focused. It just didn't fit really well into that for-profit structure. So that's what really led us to say, let's truly explore this idea.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because then it does, you are sort of this very unique kind of backbone organization in the field, and it's... Yeah. You talk about no one was covering this, right? I remember loving when the Chronicle would get delivered, the actual paper copy, every 2 weeks to our office, because it was the only time I felt like I worked in a real field, right? I'm no one in my family knew what I did. None of my friends had any idea what I did. And it was this is a real thing. There's 40 pages here, people talking about what I do, and there's job postings in the back, and it brought so much knowledge and credibility to the field. And I think it still very much does.
Yeah, when I would do speeches in our earliest days, people would take the publication and say, I use this to show my mother that I'm in a legitimate field, because everybody was having that problem of feeling because the field was so young, and everybody thought that it was just voluntary work and not a real profession. And so that's one of the things I'm really proudest of, is that we helped build a profession by connecting people through our journalism.
Well, my early career, I worked for the Boy Scouts, and I swear when we bought our first place after I got married, I think my mother-in-law couldn't wrap her head around how we paid for her, because she's he's like a scoutmaster. What do they pay him? Right. No, that's not what I do.
Not what you do.
Right. So, as the field has evolved, right? So, how do you see kind of leadership, sort of what trends are emerging? How is leadership evolving across the sector? What are you seeing at the moment?
Yeah.
Or what have you seen sort of transpire over the scope of this?
Yeah. Well, especially, taking us back to what was going on as the field was professionalizing, there's really been a dramatic change. I mean, the fact that you can get master's degrees, you can get a PhD in philanthropy, those things did not exist, all the programs, to really educate people. So, in the past few decades, the idea that people do whatever kind of training, whether it's an MBA or, there's no perfect fit for what people get, but the idea that, you can actually go to school and think about this in addition to learning on the job. I think that that's been a real transformative experience for people. The kinds of people who are going into the field certainly is different as younger people are thinking about doing it. What worries me the most, though, about what's going on in leadership right now is just how burned out nonprofit leaders are. And study after study is showing just how many people want to flee this field, and they don't want to be a leader anymore. And so I'm very, there have been all these periods in covering this that people have been talking about the leadership crisis and when it's going to happen and are there going to be enough people to fill these jobs. But right now, nonprofit leaders are exhausted. We're going to lose the expertise of the people we need most. And I'm not sure that we have the pipeline that's ready to fill them. So I would say when I think about leadership, that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, there's a huge generational shift. It's like you're seeing like a lot of leaders that, maybe hung on too long, I don't know, but like there's a generation of people that are sort of retiring from the most senior leadership roles, and then it's not really clear, and it's skipping a generation. It's, you're not, the 70-year-olds are retiring, and it's not the 60-year-olds, it's the 50-year-olds that are getting, it's like this weird shift all happening at once. And I do think, I generally like poo-poo burnout, but that's like unfair to the term, but it triggers me to be like, oh, it's all right. But I think what's actually happening is it's been so difficult through COVID, the complexities of leading nonprofits, like all those things have taken what was never an easy job, but it was an easier job, right? It's become so difficult, and now it's like you can't do it, and then you have people in these jobs 5, 7, 10, and they're like, I'm done. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I think the sort of COVID, then there was the coming out of COVID, then there was all of this federal change in policy, that all of those things were just hitting people so much. And certainly I've talked to a number of leaders who are trying to do things to groom, their successors and reaching much younger in some kinds of cases. And when they reach out to people who are in their 30s and 40s who they think, I want to mentor them, bring them in, they could be the next chief executive. They say, no, I look at what your job is and I don't want to do it.
No, it's a huge thing. Again, there was that, I feel like when I came up, if you were offered more responsibility, you took it and you couldn't say no. And now frequently I have those conversations and I had that realization. I'm like, there's nothing about what I do in my life that I think appeals to the people that are below. They're like, you look
right. They're like, why?
Right. They're like, it's like, sure, you make a little bit more money, but you work more. You seem, no thanks. And that's even more pronounced in nonprofits like themselves. At least we're in a kind of adjacent, for-profit company. But
the flip side of that, so to not be, all of those problems are real. But what is also extraordinary to me in some of the studies we've done and others have done as well is how incredibly optimistic many nonprofit leaders are that even in this really challenging environment, they're going to come up and, their organizations are going to survive. There are so many of them that are operating in deficit, that have had to cut staff, have had to cut services. Their whole missions are being attacked, as to whether, especially if they're doing things that the administration doesn't like, and that's a whole broad swath of things from, civil rights to environmental work and all of those kinds of things. And yet, when you ask them 5 years from now, what do you think your organization is going to be like, and is it going to be strong and able to carry out its mission? And they're like, absolutely, yes, we are. And, obviously that's what allows everybody to get out of bed every day. But it's really remarkable that the people who get into this field are so creative and so driven that even though they're, not in a good place at this moment, they are persistent and they are finding ways to adapt and to think about things in a different way. So it's gloomy, but then on the other hand, the average nonprofit leader will say, yeah, my job is really difficult and I hate it, but I love my work and I love my colleagues and I love my mission.
Yeah, it's a very unique thing, and it's hard work, but I've always said throughout my career, I'm like, I get to come home every day, look my kids in the face and tell them what I do matters. It's making the world better, and I don't know, that's worth some aggravation for sure. So no, it doesn't surprise me at all that it is an optimistic sort of group of leaders, and you have to be. So there has been this evolution, and all these things have happened. How do you think the expectation, what are the expectations of CEOs now? What do you think is expected? If you're the CEO of a nonprofit, what expectations do you have to meet?
Yeah. I think one of the big things, at least what's keeping me up at night, is, how is AI going to transform everything that we're doing and how we do it, and trying to really get a good picture of how technology is changing nonprofit work. And there aren't great answers yet right now. And so, those kinds of things will probably change how we do what we do. Also, just the willingness to rethink how nonprofit structures work. Are we doing this the right way? And do we have time to think about it? I have to say, if I have to tell you what is on my to-do list for the next couple of weeks, it's about, making sure that we have grant applications in, that the money's coming in, that I'm reaching out to as many funders as possible, that I'm working with my board, all those really traditional things. And yet, there are all these big picture questions that I know we need to answer, and that is what the CEO needs to lead those conversations with and gather people together. So it's how we lead our organizations, but also how we interact with other CEOs. And that isolation that many CEOs have in the nonprofit field also worries me greatly. We don't talk to each other enough. And we need to lean on each other in these really challenging times. So I think that idea that you aren't just leading your organization, but you're a very collaborative player, I think, younger people have that idea maybe a little bit down better than some older leaders do, but it's absolutely critical. And the real challenge is finding the time for it. I don't think any of us are unwilling to work with others, but when you've got, you look at the list of things you have to do for your own organization, sometimes it's hard to put your head up and think about, what are these other things that we collectively can do as a sector.
Yeah, no, and we spend a lot of time bringing leaders together and having those conversations. Like, look, selfishly, we get to learn from them. They're people that can eventually be our clients. But I watch how fruitful it is for them, because they don't get to talk to each other. They don't get to sort of be in a space that's relatively safe. Right. It's you are lonely. So it's pretty remarkable what can happen when you bring people together. But you're right. Like, everybody's schedules are. We invite 40 CEOs, 10 of them can make it. Right. Like it's just people are busy. So when you think about, all right, we call this bigger possibilities, so let's sort of take a little bit of zoom out a little bit here. Where do you think collaboration is one place, clearly, but where are some of the places where you think leaders can be bolder right now? Like, how can leaders of nonprofits meet the moment?
The real thing I want to see is a better way for nonprofit leaders to work with the heads of foundations, with donors, the people who have the resources. We have to figure out some way to solve the major funding problem. And, certainly what we've observed over time, and one reason the Chronicle was created was with that idea of bringing nonprofits and foundations together, because they don't talk to each other enough. They operate in these separate worlds. And I think we've had some success at being able to help, both parts of this equation learn from each other and think about what's on their minds, what are the trends, what's going on. But what I see lately is, just a growing gulf. One of the studies we did found that, more than a third of nonprofit leaders think that, foundations understand them. The rest of them don't think that foundations have any clue what's going on. And only 29% of foundations think that nonprofits understand what their problems are. Well, that's really worrisome, that we don't get each other and we're not talking to each other about what things we need and what resources we need. So there's that problem. Then there's a deeper problem of, in an age of wealth inequality, we have tremendous resources. There are too many wealthy people who don't even think about giving, who don't know how they could give effectively. And as nonprofits, as foundation leaders, we haven't figured out a way to persuade people that this is an enterprise worth supporting as a profession, as a field, not just, I want to cure science, which cure cancer, or, really accelerate those kinds of things, which is really important. But how do we get it done? How do we build the infrastructure that is going to allow us to solve incredible problems? Those are the kinds of conversations that I hope nonprofit leaders could be at the forefront of, because they can explain what they need, why they need it. I mean, none of us have been in a situation where, you talk to some wealthy philanthropist about something and you find out that it's more that they don't know something, not that they don't care. I don't think the lack of generosity comes from, some great hoarding or stinginess. It's more they don't know. They don't have experiences with the people who are solving the problems, and they're incredibly skeptical. But if we could all find ways to get to know each other, to talk candidly about how to lift this field up, given the transfer of wealth that's happening, trillions of dollars are available and they're sitting on the table. So together, this field has to tackle that problem. So when you talk about doing something bold, that's what I would really like to see. And it's not one leader, and it's not just the heads of nonprofits, it's the heads of foundations. It's leaders who, probably are giving pledge level donors, those kinds of things, who have already said, I'm committing, but we have to come together some way and say the system that we have now is broken. The resources aren't flowing to necessarily the best nonprofits, and they're not flowing nearly as generously as they need to be. And the biggest thing that I would love to see, donors come together on is to say, let's deal with this technology deficit. Nonprofits spend about 3% of their budgets on technology. Businesses spend 8 to 10%. Well, couldn't, a whole bunch of wealthy donors come together and say, regardless of cause, we're just going to deal with this technology issue and make sure that every nonprofit that is, doing good work has access to the people and the ideas and the software and all the things that they need to accelerate their work. That's what would help us all leap forward. And you can be agnostic about the cause, but say we all need to move into a new world. Those are the kinds of things I'd love to see people rally behind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the technology piece is huge, and it gets, any kind of infrastructure just immediately gets underinvested in.
Yeah.
Whether fundraising, technology to do fundraising, what you name it, is automatically the thing that cuts through. And I get it, right? Because people are like, what's the program? We've got to feed, we've got to research, whatever the thing is we're doing. I get that. But like, if you don't do the other things, so that's where it is a place where donors can bring that sort of mindset. And it's funny you talk about the two sides, foundations and nonprofit executives not knowing each other. Just had a conversation yesterday where someone made the point, which I was like, yes. You can always tell when you meet someone at a foundation that has worked in a nonprofit. And there's not many of them, but you can immediately tell that they have.
But it's dramatically different.
Right. They just have a different mindset. And I'm also like, why wouldn't there be more of, why wouldn't that be where they source their staff more?
Yes.
But anyway.
Yes.
And then you have, obviously the income inequality is terrible, and so many of the organizations are working to solve it. And then in doing so, kind of vilifying wealth in a way, which, I get it.
Right.
But it's like you have to raise money where the money is, and it's like that they're not a bad person just because they have the resources. How do you make them a partner and get them to invest in your work? Yeah, it's complicated, but those are the things that are sort of driving the field at the moment, and those are the answers to unlocking where the field wants to go.
Exactly. We have to figure out ways to do that.
No, or else we've been, I don't know, it's somewhere between 2 and 4%, depending on the number that you believe of GDP has been, and that's my whole career. That's what it's been. So I'm kind of like, have you done anything?
Why isn't it 5%?
Right. And if it doesn't really move, what are we all doing? If we can't, if I spend 30 years doing this and it's still the same number, what did we really accomplish? All right, as we kind of round towards the end here, what's something you're still learning? You've been at this for a minute, but what are you still learning?
Oh, I'm learning everything. And part of it is, just how to think about nonprofit mission and focus in a way that, because for us, we came out of a for-profit experience, and so how to think about the parts that blend nonprofit and for-profit in the best ways possible is something that, I would call a work in progress. And the other big thing, and everybody's got this, how do you change people in a time of such rapid change? Everybody, on my staff, of course, they're working really hard, but we need to change to serve our audience better in new ways and to adapt. And it's hard. It's hard to change. And so in some ways, I think if I could learn anything, I would just have taken massive courses in change management and forgotten about the, I don't need to know the journalism, I don't need to know the financial piece as much as I really just need to know how do you change people and move them along in a way that makes them feel comfortable and excited about the work and not nervous. And I think we're all probably dealing with that, but that would be just, sort of a wonderful thing for all of us to learn from one another. Who are the best people at, leading cultures through change? So that's where I'm putting my thought as much as possible, and I see others doing the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and you've been around our team, and we're going through lots of changes, and a thing that I come back to and struggle with is I actually am the rare person that doesn't mind change. I like change. I thrive in change, and I have to remind myself, well, no one else does, Craig. So, you can't,
exactly.
Just assume, I get up, this is cool. We'll do something totally new today. Most people are what do you create?
Most people,
so you've got to be very deliberate in how you bring people along there. And you're right. I think we're all doing it today. So it's you're right. I spent a lot of time learning accounting. Maybe I didn't need to do that. I need to know this and stuff.
Yeah.
Really appreciate this conversation, Stacy. Really appreciate you joining us. Have loved kind of just being around you over the years and sort of toiling in this vineyard alongside you. And it's just fantastic. You bring so much to the field. It's so appreciated. And thanks to everyone for listening to Bigger Possibilities. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it, tell your friends. And we will see you next time. Thank you.